Review time! So, today we're doing a review on the new series entitled Kindred. That is an FX show on Hulu. Before we get started, though, just a little disclaimer there will be spoilers in this review. So, if you haven't already watched the show and you don't want it to be spoiled, I would cut this off, go ahead and watch the show, and come back when you already did. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so if you're not aware, the new series entitled Kindred on Hulu is a series which is adapted from a book by the author Octavia Butler. And she is an African American science fiction writer. Now, I will say, I've heard of Octavia Butler. I feel like I, somewhere along the lines, have watched a show or a movie that was inspired by one of her books. I really just can't put my finger on it. But what I will say is that I personally have not gotten into her books just yet. I've only, like, in the last few years, really started getting into science fiction because in my world, it wasn't really a mainstream thing that I knew a lot of kids who were into science fiction, like, really heavy. But I'm not, like, I feel like now that I've watched this series, and I'll give my full on opinion of it later, but I will say this series has inspired me to want to go back and read her books because I've heard really good things. So I'll start there. All right, so I did finish the series. I'm not going to spoil all of the episodes. I am going to talk about episode one because I feel like episode one really gets you into the story arc, what the series is going to be about, you know, and you kind of get a feeling of what you're working with when you watch episode one. Okay. So first, let me read the show description and then I'll tell you what kind of vibes I was getting. So, I saw the series flyer the other day on Facebook, and the picture was kind of giving me all my life I had to fight. I love Harpo. God knows I do. Till you do right by me type of vibe. So I'm like, okay, what is this? Like I've never heard of this book. So, I share it and then I read the description and it says a young aspiring writer discovers secrets about her past when she finds herself mysteriously being pulled back and forth in time to a 19th century plantation. So right off, it was giving me like antebellum vibes. That movie that was out a couple of years ago. At least the vibes that we thought antebellum was about. So I'm like, okay, um, I'll give it a try. Now, let me just preface this by saying that I personally have gotten out of watching black trauma movies and shows just for the sake of watching black trauma. If you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying. Like Black History Month, I feel like we're pushed a bunch of shows about slavery, segregation, and they all are very educational, but it's like, how much black trauma can we watch just for the sake of repeating these stories? But since this had a science fiction arc, I gave it a go, and I'm glad that I did. So we opened up with episode one, and they used the old, like, I don't know if you remember when your English teacher would tell you, make sure you open your story with some action and pull the reader in. Well, that's the device that they use to open the story. So at first it's like a bit confusing. It opens up with the main character Dana, and she's kind of like writhing around on the floor and she's screaming out Kevin, and she's clearly disheveled. You can see it could be some mental issues going on. There's like police knocking at the door and you're like, whoa, like what is really going on here? And then they hit you with the 2 days earlier. So, that lets you know that you're going to get to the story of how she got to this disheveled state. So then we cut to Dana going to dinner with her aunt and uncle, which we quickly figure out. And let me just say, when she shows up at dinner, she's looking good, like with a T at the end. I mean, the fro is froing. Because she's natural. Fro is throwing, dress is dressing. She's giving, you know what I'm saying? Like, she looks good. She looks like she's healthy, wealthy, and, all of the above. She sits down with her aunt and uncle. And right away, like these two people start to get on my nerves. Like the girl looks good. She looked like she's happy. She shows up to dinner, and all they can do is like talk about how she's acting weird, and you know, she's like, okay, like I moved to LA from New York. We get that part of the story to be closer to you guys because you're the only family that I have. And they're just acting like, what is you doing here? Like, why are you here? What is you all right? Like, what? It just they started to get on my nerves very quickly. So the dinner's awkward. They don't seem very happy to see her, and then you kind of get a whiff of a backstory about like her mother, and maybe there was some mental illness, and they're concerned about her. So the awkward dinner ends, and the uncle leave, and then she figures out her phone is about to die. So she asks around the restaurant, and she's like, does anybody have a charger I can use? And one of the waiters, there's a white guy who was a waiter there. It's like, yeah, I got a charger. Like I don't have it in here. It's in my car. I can give you a ride home. You can use my charger. I'm immediately like, girl, you better not get in that car with him. Like, no. But you already kind of get the sense that this guy kind of like likes her. So against her better judgment, well, the viewer's better judgment, she gets in the car with this strange guy that she meets at the bar. He gives her a ride home. Thankfully, he's not a killer or like a kidnapper. I'm sorry, an unaliver or a kidnapper. He drops her off. She has some records on the porch. And you kind of already get the sense that this is probably going to be like her love interest. She goes in the house. Happenstancely gets on like a dating app and connects with the guy that drove her home. I'm like, okay, yeah, he's definitely going to be the love interest. And then she goes to sleep, and that's the first time that she does this time traveling thing. So she wakes up like on a plantation, and there is this baby that's in danger, and she saves the baby, and like the baby's nurse, like his slave nurse or whatever you would call it, comes in, and we quickly find out that this lady is her mother. And one thing I'm sorry that I forgot to mention is that at dinner, they kind of go into the fact that her mother and father passed away, a long time ago. So when she goes to her time travel, she like runs into her mother, and you're like, whoa, like, okay, what's going on here? So we quickly get into, with her back and forth time travels, we start to figure out that there's some purpose that she has going back in time, that back on this plantation is where her mother really is. Apparently she time traveled, and there is this baby. Well, he progresses in the story, as like a toddler and a young adult, Rufus, that she has to save, and it has something to do with her family line. And let me just say, I understand, like, okay, she goes back, she saves Rufus, she comes back home, she goes back, saves Rufus again, and I'm like, lady, Rufus's mother, like, get a hold of your child. Like, after a few savings of this Rufus, I'm like, okay, Rufus's mama needs to keep a better eye on him, because he's just always in some kind of danger. But this is kind of the arc of the story. The mother is a terrible person. Rufus's mother, of course, his father's a terrible person. But we get to the meat of the story. In episode 1, that she's time traveling back and forth. She has to kind of figure out why her mother was there, why she got stuck there, what's the purpose of this, and why she has to save this Rufus. So I would say very quickly, the story pulls you in. You get interested very quickly in like what's going on. I think that, well, I'll start with the really good stuff. I think that the acting is good. I think that the cinematography and the production, everything is good. Like I said, they had her showing up to dinner, styled to a T, but then when they go back in time, I feel like the costumes are appropriate. Also love to see a natural, froed out, woman as the main character. Love to see it. I feel like the love interest, even though like they really got to, because she meets him at the restaurant, he drives her home, they connect online. They get to doing the do pretty fast. But he's giving like good boyfriend vibes. He took her, um, drove her to the store, got her something to eat, helped her put her bed together, watched soap operas with her because she told him that that's what she watched with her grandma. And I'm not gonna lie, like if I find somebody who puts my furniture together, brings me chicken wings, lays in the bed with me, and watches like Lifetime movies, you can pretty much have me. So he's like a top notch boyfriend. I like that arc of the story. I like the science fiction aspect of it. Like I said, it's not just straight trauma, like just straight black trauma. There's a science fiction aspect, and then you have to kind of get into the story. I feel like the writing is very good. Some of it is hard to watch because it is a period piece. Like, I'm well, it's partially a period piece. You know, when she first goes back into, because she's going back into the 19th century, she's going back into slavery times. My first thought is like, ooh, what a horrible period of time to go back to. But then I would say any period of time in American history is probably not going to be so good to time travel to if you're black. So, it's just, it's kind of hard to watch like the slave owners and the people that they interact with, the society folks, live this privileged life and then be surrounded by these slaves who, of course, they're not treating like they're on their level of humanity. Um, there's a period in one of the shows where like the slaves are being disciplined and literally they're being starved as they're disciplined. Very hard to watch. Um, but I feel like it's redeeming. There's a redeeming arc with this story of Dana and her mother being the people who are going back in time to save this family line. And also, it just really pulls you in because you want to know, like, the first episode when she goes back in time, Rufus's mother thinks that she's like a witch. You know what I'm saying? And you're kind of like, okay, well, is she a witch? Like, what is going, was somebody in the family line involved in witchcraft or what is this that's going on? So it definitely pulls you in. The characters in the story, and like I said, it's a period piece, so there's lots of characters to dislike. The characters in the story you're supposed to dislike, you dislike them. Like, they are doing their job making you mad. So that would be like Rufus's mother, his father, the one that owns the plantation. Very just unlikable people. The people that you are supposed to sympathize with in the story, you're sympathizing with them. So, yeah, I think it's very well done. I think the contrast between her going back in the slave days and living in today's time, because there's this one part in the episode where, the waiter guy, they've at this point, once you get through the first season, they've spent maybe a week together in real time, but they, like I said, they progress really quickly. And so they start to fall in love. So when they're stuck back in the slavery days, one of the other slaves says something to her like, I know you think he loves you, but it's not possible. That's not in their nature, meaning that an interracial relationship could never work because, since her boyfriend is white, he couldn't really love her. And I think it's very plausible. We think in our time, it's very plausible. It's not, love is love. But back then, the dynamics that they had in the slave days, it wouldn't seem plausible because it wouldn't even, even though we know that the slaves were taken advantage of, or sometimes there was relationships between black and white that were consensual, it just wasn't a plausible thing to think that people were really going to be in a loving relationship that was interracial. So, she doesn't, of course, the other slave doesn't know she's talking to somebody who's come from modern times, but, we know that. So, yeah. But like I said, if you can get past the trauma of it all, because some of it is like, it'll make you mad. It'll make you mad. There's one scene in particular where I jumped up and was like, oh no, like this would be, I would have made it. This would have been the last day on this earth for me because she would have caught hands. And I'm not going to give it away, but yeah. Um, Other than that, like I said, very well done. I thought it was a very well done show. I did binge the season overnight, so I will be one of those people who's ready for season two. And I've seen a lot of people who feel the same way. So it's definitely worth a watch. Definitely worth a watch. Even if you're not like a science fiction fanatic, I feel like this is just very well done. It has a lot of aspects, and it may turn you into a science fiction fanatic. So, yeah, I would give it a go. But let me know what you guys think about this series in the comments. Were there some parts for you that were like hard to watch? Were there some parts for you that were really well done? What particular characters do you like or dislike? Just what are your thoughts? All right. Until next time.